What is up guys, Broken Ronin here, and in this video I'll be explaining and breaking it down blood manipulation. Seketsu Sojutsu, or blood manipulation, is the inherited technique of one of the big three sorcerer families, specifically the Kamo clan. As the name would suggest, blood manipulation allows the user to change the shape and properties of blood so long as it is theirs. It is stated by Mechamaru that blood manipulation is a technique that is great in close quarters, mid-range, and long-range combat, and is generally lauded as a technique that has a good balance of versatility and power. This is something I think you'll get to understand a bit more as I explain some of the abilities derived from blood manipulation, but I do think Mechamaru's statement is important to contextualize the potency of this technique early on. As we've seen in both the anime and manga up to this point, users of blood manipulation can use their technique to manipulate things covered in their blood to defy the laws of physics, as shown in chapter 43. Weapons like arrows can be manipulated and move through space as long as they have trace amounts of blood on them, as Kamo was able to show in his fight versus Megumi. Quick aside, one thing that isn't necessarily innate to blood manipulation as a curse technique but is relevant to the discussion is the poison contained in Choso's blood. Because he is a death painting, his blood is innately poisonous, and thus any attacks that he lands when using blood manipulation have the combined effect of damage from the technique and his blood's toxicity. This poison is so potent that even certain reverse curse technique users can't completely mitigate its effects. One of the many projectiles used by blood manipulators is Kari Barai, or slicing exorcism. This technique is used by both of the only shown blood manipulators in the series and seems to function as a simple disc of hardened and sharpened blood that is made to cut through its opponents. While Kamo's slicing exorcism is much too weak to actually show off its damaging capabilities, when used in chapter 84 by Choso, we see that it can very easily cut through very large crowds of people. Another one of the ranged techniques at their disposal is Sekibaku, or crimson binding. This technique is pretty simple and straightforward, as it is simply just a net of blood that has similar properties to a regular net meant to capture people. This technique, even when the hands of someone like Kamo, seems to be powerful enough to restrain the likes of Nue. Another notable projectile that stems from this technique is Kesi Seke, or blood meteorite. This one is also pretty straightforward. The user merely hardens their blood and launches it at an opponent in order to deal damage. As stated by Choso, however, this technique does not have the speed or power of some of his more powerful techniques, and is really only useful for catching opponents off guard, as its damaging capabilities aren't really all that useful against people who have their cursed energy reinforced. The final three long-range applications of blood manipulation all kind of correlate with each other, so I'll cover them simultaneously. Of the three, first we have Byakuren, or Convergence. This technique compresses and condenses blood to the absolute limitations of a blood manipulator's ability, and acts mainly as a setup for Senketsu and Choshinsei, otherwise known as Piercing Blood and Supernova. Supernova is the weaker of these two abilities and mainly uses the small orbs created by Convergence as projectiles to catch an opponent off guard. When it is shown off by Choso, it seems to have similar properties to a buckshot as it shoots off omnidirectionally. Now, I would imagine that just about anybody in possession of the blood manipulation curse technique could use Supernova. However, it is stated by the narrator in chapter 142 of the manga that the technique is original to Choso and something he developed by honing his technique for 150 years. This sort of implies that it's not something that just anybody can develop quickly. However, I don't think that there's any properties of Choso's blood manipulation that specifically apply to Supernova that don't apply to every other Kamo clan member. The more powerful of the two abilities, and arguably the most destructive ability that any blood manipulator has, is Piercing Blood. After charging the attack with Convergence, the user of this ability shoots a beam of blood that has insane damaging capabilities. This technique is displayed to be far stronger than any other attack that blood manipulators have, at least at long range, and we know this because even Kamo, someone who's far weaker than Hanami, was able to damage Hanami's tough skin with Piercing Blood, even though just before this with Slicing Exorcism, he did absolutely no damage. When this attack is used at its maximum capacity and reinforced with cursed energy, it is stated that Piercing Blood can reach the speed of sound, making it one of the faster techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen up to this point. We also see that in the hands of someone like Choso, Piercing Blood can even rip through the cursed energy enhanced flesh of someone with crazy high durability, like Yuji Itadori, which goes on to further solidify its insane damaging potential. The next technique that is sort of an offshoot of blood manipulation is also a pretty simple one, but unlike the ones I've mentioned to this point, it is really only useful in a close quarter setting. The technique in question is Ketsujin, or Blood Edge. With this technique, the user manipulates their blood into the shape of a knife, and by rotating the blood contained within this blade at high speeds, the lethality of the weapon is increased dramatically. This certainly isn't a powerhouse ability like Piercing Blood or anything, however it is certainly a useful ability when fighting up close, and does have its uses as Choso demonstrated in his fight against Yuji. The next ability isn't really named, but is a technique Choso displays in chapter 105. In this chapter, we see that he's able to harden the blood within his body in order to amp both his attack potency and durability. Now, this is a very risky technique as the hardening of one's blood vessels can lead to sudden thrombosis, but if one is in a pickle, they can pull this ability out and it is strong enough and durable enough to resist the full power punches of Yuji Itadori, kind of contextualizing just how strong this blood armor can be. The next and final main ability that blood manipulators use in combat is Sekiden Yakudo, or Flowing Red Scale. Flowing red scale is essentially the equivalent of extreme blood doping. By forcibly raising the temperature, pulse, and number of blood cells in one's body, a user of blood manipulation can amplify their base stats and allow them to become more lethal in close quarters combat especially. In chapter 43, Megumi remarks that Kamo, when using Flowing Red Scale, has power and speed on a completely different level than before. This isn't an exact quantification of the amp by any means, however it does indicate that the amp is rather sizable. On top of this, if you are really good with blood manipulation, you have access to Sekiden Yakudo Sai, or Flowing Red Scale Stack. This has the same effect as the normal version of this technique, except the amp given is implied to be much larger. To what degree is unknown, but seeing as how it most likely requires more finesse and cursed energy to use Stack than the base version of the ability, it should be a notable difference. Now, usually this ability is applied across the user's entire body in order to amp them in a general sense, but in chapter 142 it is shown that this technique can be focused in the extraocular muscles, or to put it more simply, the eyes. This amp seems to give you much better dynamic vision, and is a large enough amp to allow Choso to go from being perception blitzed by his opponents to being able to keep track of them clearly with his eyes. The ability to focus Flowing Red Scale Stack into a specific part of the body most likely isn't something limited to just the eyes, and if needed, can probably be used on other appendages, like the arms or legs, in order to enhance their strength exclusively. While blood manipulation certainly is a powerful and versatile technique, there are some serious and definitive drawbacks and limitations of the ability that apply to most users of blood manipulation. One universal thing that blood manipulators have trouble with is water, because water messes with the blood's ability to coagulate. If drenched or surrounded by water, a user of this technique cannot control blood outside of their body, as shown very clearly in chapter 104 of the manga. Another weakness of this technique, or rather a limitation, is a limited access to blood. Because this technique requires the controlling of one's own blood, users of blood manipulation are limited to their own blood supply and will die of blood loss if they overdo it. This weakness can be mitigated by prepping blood packs or weapons covered in blood in advance. However, if an impromptu fight occurs, most blood manipulators have to be very careful about blood loss. I say most and not all because this does not apply to someone like Choso. Because he is a death painting, he has the unique ability to convert cursed energy into blood, so no matter how much blood Choso spills, so long as he has cursed energy, he cannot die of blood loss. This is a very good thing for Choso because this not only opens up his potential attacking options, but it also means that his technique only has one real glaring weakness, which is water. Besides that, he really experiences no unique drawbacks from blood manipulation as a technique. With that being said, that is blood manipulation in a nutshell. If you enjoyed this video and want to watch a video of me explaining the inherited techniques of the Gojo clan, links to those videos will be on the screen now. And if you want to see me explain at least one of the inherited techniques of the Zenin family, I have that video up here as well. And if you want to see me explain the 10 Shadows Curse technique, I will be explaining that later on the channel. So make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, as I will be making sure to cover that topic relatively soon. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all next Sunday with another Jujutsu Kaisen Explain video.